Welcome to another episode of The Greatest Pod, where we discuss and debate what makes something great. I'm Ron Swallow.
I'm Ed Greer, and today it's chorizo time. It's an in joke for people who watch Drink and Draw. This guy is an original founder of the legendary comics group Drink and Draw. He's done storyboards, he's done character design, he's done things on the Boondocks. He's drawn Wonder Man. He's drawn my man Solitaire for Malibu Comics. He's drawn Ray of the Rat for CrossGen.
Right.
Famously, I mean, this guy, he's got a book called Draw Fight Scenes Like a Pro, which I have an autographed copy of. I am just so geeked to have this person on the podcast. I love him, and you will too. My main man, Jeff Johnson.
Hey guys, it's good to see you guys.
You too.
Hey, so Ron, you looking buff. How's the workout going?
It's going good, actually. I had to take a little break because I've been editing a whole ton.
Right.
But so I'm still doing the push-ups and the squats and the sit-ups, but I'm not doing the run right now.
Okay.
So
yeah, you're on your way to One Punch Man.
Yeah, it's gonna happen. Hopefully I won't go completely bald. It's
a small price to pay. Right.
Yeah.
Well, what's my excuse? that's the most terrible part. I'm already bald.
You just gotta pick the right anime character.
That's right.
I'd have a tough road to hoe on some of those properties trying to find a character like me. But I will say I want to talk to you, Jeff, about honestly just this will be kind of an interview, kind of about your path, but kind of trying to shape the conversation. I kind of want to talk about the difference between the amateur and the professional, because I think it's a big topic in comics because there's so many people trying to do comics. There's so many ways to do comics now.
Right.
You know what I mean? So the underlying point of this conversation, I think, might be just what's the difference between a professional and an amateur, not in a pejorative way, but just the things that actually identify one from the other.
I think that's a really interesting question, especially considering that you know how every age has it was the golden age, the silver age, the industrial age, the information age, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that we're kind of living through the misinformation and the disinformation age and the death of expertise. I think we see it all around us. When I was in the Army years ago, back in the last century, I was an illustrator for a psychological operations unit, for a PSYOP unit. And what we did was propaganda. And so I've been studying propaganda since I was 18. And I think that it's safe to say that there's been a propaganda war being waged on the idea of truth and expertise for about 30 years. And to make a broader point about amateur versus expert, I think society lost that war. And the idea of expertise was one of the casualties. So, because the great thing about the internet is you can go on there and you can find out anything you want and you can get any reference that you want. And so, say you want to draw a tank, instead of in the olden days having to either remember what a tank looked like or go to the library to find a picture of a tank, you can just pull up a picture of a tank and trace it. And now, wham, bam, you are a badass tank artist. So I think the difference between the expert and the amateur really is how many hours you've put into the craft, right? And how deep you go. The difference, because you can be in a fight, right? And you can win by throwing a punch, even if you've never been in a fight before. You can get a lucky shot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you can be a professional fighter and know exactly how to hit that person, time it, do all those things, and the result will be the same, but the quality of the experience will be different, right? Mm. So a person can make a comic book. Making a comic book is not hard in the grand scheme of things, right? You put pictures on a paper, you put words to those pictures. If it tells a story and someone reads it, then that is a successful comic. But the difference between, I think, so that, and any amateur can do that. But I think the difference between an expert person making a comic is the level of hours and insanity and attention to the minutia
Mm.
that an expert will have and what they're trying to do with the comic. Like Scott Collins and I had a conversation not too long ago about, and I think it's the level of nerdiness that you might put into it, right? Like,
Yeah.
So Scott Collins, this is going to be one of the nerdiest things that most people who don't like comics or know anything about comics are not going to understand why we're even having this conversation. But Scott Collins and I had a very long, not debate, but sort of like exploration, musing over the size of gutters and how wide to make a gutter and how the different size and width of a gutter affects the reader's perception of time in between the gutters. So we're talking like Ron's like, yeah, of course it affects but that's the level. Like Scott and I will have a 7-hour conversation about does 1/8 of an inch versus a 1/4 of an inch. Does that mean that how much time has passed in between these two panels? How much time or space is then allowed the reader to input their own imagery? Like, is it black? Is it white? The shape of the jagged panels? Like all these things affect the end result in subtle ways. And I think if I were to pick one word to describe the difference between an amateur and an expert, it would be subtlety.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I think it takes a certain level of thought to think about like those times when you'll watch something and you'll see that because the characters are going through some sort of emotional turmoil, the panels are topsy-turvy. The panels are Dutch sometimes, and as different power relationships happen in the panels, somebody could be on top from the right or on top from the left, and all these different things. And like you said, that the space between the gutters, the shape of the panels, the shape of the panels and their order. Are there 3 on a page like Darwin Cook would do? Sometimes, all these different things have different reading experiences, and then you wonder like, well, why'd Frank Miller put like 74 panels on a page? They're all talking heads and then one big shot of Batman, because it's like moment, stop.
Right, exactly. Like that's some brilliant storytelling, because one of the things Frank is like, he's obviously a genius, but like the way he manipulates the reader's experience, very few creators do it as well as he did it, right? Because he did make you feel the timing of that, the emotional acceleration, then suddenly the stop, right? I always like, Ed, you and I have talked a bunch about how I think there's a correlation between good stand-up, or just stand-up in general, good storytelling, and comic book storytelling, right? How you engage with your audience, how their sense of time is affected by the way you're telling your story, your use of pauses and words, and then also the idea of leading them to an expectation and then changing that expectation or meeting that expectation in a slightly different way, and spinning them around to get the most out of the joke. And I think that good storytelling does that, and expert storytelling does that, where an amateur can tell a great story, especially if something cool happened, but like an expert will make you live that experience the way they want you to live it.
You know what's interesting to me is this reminds me a lot of the difference between people who actually understand science and practice it, and the people who read about it. So
absolutely,
I'm a person who reads about science. Like I'm totally interested in it. And on a very low level, I sort of get the idea of gravity.
Sure.
That it's a giant mass pressing on a space and time, and that creates a force that keeps us places. I get that on a very basic level. But what real scientists can do is they look at that from multiple directions and look at every nook and cranny. They also include the math. They have multiple levels that they're thinking on that bring them to a point to actually understand what that thing is. And I think that's the same thing with stand-up and storytelling. Like, I know some people who can tell some great stories. They would not be good stand-ups.
Right.
Like, they don't understand that there's a bunch of things involved. They would never be able to move the mic stand out of the way. Something as simple as thinking like that. So
Yeah.
I think I get that when you're talking about art in the same ways. A professional is able to think about this on multiple levels. They're also in a teamwork with a storyteller, or they're doing both, writing the story and doing the art.
Right.
And that changes the dynamic as well, because now you have to think about not just how the art flows, but also how the story is flowing within the art. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's so I occasionally write stuff for myself, and I have studied writing, and I'm currently working on a book that's taking me for years. It's like how to draw a 6-issue, basically trade paperback using the standard 3 arc storyline plot, like plot devices and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done a serious study of storytelling and writing for comics, but I've written very little. So I would not describe myself as an expert, but more as a student. I think that, but even just studying it, I realized that there's a shit ton of stuff going on that good writers do that that I didn't even realize until I started looking at it more uh, scientifically. I'm like, oh, I'm trying to break down the way this like, when do you introduce this character? How do you do this? Why? Trying to understand story scientifically, it really helped me appreciate just how much craft I don't see, right? Like that I don't understand because I'm not actually doing it. So reading about stuff, like I study gravity, and I think it's fantastic. The concept that mass causes space to stretch and that it actually things falling towards a gravity hole, like that's crazy to me. It's because really gravity is not pulling, it's pushing. And so it's just even the shift of that concept, like you're not being held to the ground, you're being pushed into the ground. It's just a different, and then there's a crazy amount of math that explains that I don't understand at all. So even I think art and science I think they're the most similar when viewed by someone on the outside, because they think that they get what's going on but have no idea.
And also, just one point I'd like to interject in here. I think there also is, and in no way do I want to denigrate education and intellect at all, but there does come this class of person whose job it is to educate and never do. That comes into these hard disciplines. You know what I'm saying? Like these art teachers who, no diss, but you're an art teacher and you're telling people how to do sequential art. If you've never done it, that's a weird situation. Now, the best, the Will Eisners, the Bern Hogarths and stuff, they were hardcore cartoonists and would give you a few morsels at the School of Art or whatever. And like Joe Kubert, great cartoonist, obviously. So yes, he can give you tips. I'm not saying that, but like some guys who have literally never done 3 issues of any damn thing ever, and certainly never had a 30-day deadline, are doing giant, costly comic book courses. And in screenwriting, it's even worse. Some of these fools, there's one guy, his sister is a big actor, and he's a giant muckety muck professor at UCLA teaching legions of screenwriters. Has like 2 credits on like Boxcar Bertha's Kid in 1972. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, what the hell? So like there is this thing, once something gets hard enough, there's a whole class of persons whose job it is to study it and then tell it to other people in a game of telephone, even though they never pursue that themselves,
I think you're right about that. It is a funny subset of an expert, right? Because I think to be a comic book artist, which is the only thing I really know about, is you have to have the skill sets of drawing a comic, the fundamentals of the mechanics of drawing a comic. And then you have to be able to do it in such a way that someone is interested in paying you for it, right? Like, and then the real hard part, I think the real thing that separates the wheat from the chaff is then you have to be the kind of personality that then goes out and then gets people to pay you to do it. I think that's the part that's hard, because that involves a totally separate skill set, right?
It does.
That involves, I think most of the work I got early on in my career was not because I was any better as a comic book artist than a dozen other guys. It's that I was better in the room, and people, I made it enjoyable to do projects with me. Like I was a good collaborator. I understood what people were going for. Like that, I was good on a team. I was not necessarily the best penciler back then. There were lots of guys who were way better than me who never got onto a book because they didn't. Because I did the thing that a lot of people can't do, which is back in the day, you made cold calls. You just called someone. You got a phone number of an editor, and you called up, and you had to have a way to get them to listen to you, and then a way to get them to maybe give you a shot at work. It's crazy. That's got nothing to do with drawing a comic.
Well, let's get into a little bit of that, because I think people know you from your various projects and stuff, but I want people to know you. So when you call up one of these editors and you go, what, like, I was a Marine, like what do you say? Like, I have life experience.
Right.
Karate chopping people in the necks. I have a seafood. You know what I'm saying? I can kick an apple off of your head like William Tell or whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? And also I pencil comics. Are you hooked yet? Like,
did you come in like a Van Damme and do a scissor kick,
right,
but then also draw at the same time? You know what
I wish any of that had helped. So back in the day, you guys remember when there was no internet and that you had no email. We had snail mail and you could make phone calls, right?
Yep.
So I would get the addresses and the names of the editors working on various books at Marvel and DC, and then I would do samples, right? I knew the process of, like, you do 3 or 6 pages of samples of the character that editor works on, to show, like, hey, I get what you're doing. And then you write the letter as, like, I'm aspiring to be a comic book artist. I would love, what you really do first is you ask, like, I would love for any feedback on these samples. Someday this is what I would be. I would really appreciate the time to give me some heads up. And then I'd sent a ton of those for a year or so. So I got out of high school, joined the Army, and then I was reservist for a long time. And then while I was reservist, I was working crappy day jobs and then sending samples in to anyone I could get samples in to, trying to find any kind of work in comics. And so I sent stuff to Marvel and DC, and I never heard anything back. I never got any responses. And so I just assumed that they were taking unsolicited mail and throwing it right in the garbage. So to stop that, which is what I would do, right? And so to stop that from happening, I started drawing the character. Like, if it was a Moon Knight editor, I would draw Moon Knight on the cover, or Green Lantern or something, so that in the hopes that they would not just throw it away, that they would look at it and open it. And then if I ever got any kind of phone number at a show, I would call and be like, hey, I sent you a thing. And, like, so I'd have a script, like, that I would practice it, because you wanted to be confident, but also, hopeful, and then kind of like you're begging, so you kind of want to weigh all those things together. And then so then you would call and you would talk to, and sometimes you would get someone who was nice and would listen to you, and then they might send you a script, or they might send you, like, a suggestion of study this guy or study that guy, and then you would start to build a relationship. So if you could get a finger into a crack or a foot in the door, and then you'd be like, okay, I'm serious about this, and then but I would also go to shows. Back in the day, you could just go to a show, and Marvel and DC and other companies had representatives. They had editors at these shows.
Oh, wow.
And at a WonderCon, I met Fabian Nicieza, and when he was still marketing at Marvel, and he was just a really nice guy, and he gave me some advice, and he started sending me scripts. And then I was able to learn the lessons. Like, he would be like, oh, you need to work on this aspect of storytelling, or you need to work on this aspect of figure drawing. And then I would do that and then send him the new samples. And then whenever I would see him at the shows, we would talk and get together and became friends. And eventually, when he became an editor, my big break was he then gave me a shot at Wonder Man. So,
well, okay, before we get into that, I do want to mention one thing, and that's the work that you put in. If anybody's listening right now, I want you to hear that when someone said, hey, you should work on this, he didn't go, oh, screw this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He didn't go, oh, I don't want to do that work. He just went to work and and figured out how to do that stuff and actually listened to the person. And also I'd also like to point out that you said make a relationship. And I think that might be one of the keys as well, because I know in stand-up it's the thing that I have messed up a lot, which is I didn't go and make relationships with people.
Right.
Stand-up is a weird thing because it is kind of a loner thing, but nothing should be a loner thing. It's just not how things are done. You cannot get successful by yourself most of the time.
Well, especially if it's going to be something like comics where you need a publisher, you need a writer, you need an inker, a colorist. I mean, stand up, you at least need an audience and you need a place to do it. So there is the club owner or the manager or the promoter or whatever, right? Like, one of the things that's important, at least I would attribute a lot of my success and continuing to work as much as I have over the years, is that I do genuinely like what I do. And so even if it's long hours, say at a studio, like I'm there having a pretty good time doing the work. We all, get burned out and whatnot, but generally speaking, that if I'm on a team, I'm going to not be the problem person on the team. Right. So I think that, and then, so if you are not if you do the work and you are good, and so, like the trick is just to be at the top of someone's head, right? When they're figuring out like, oh, we need a guy to come in and do 10 minutes or open up or MC or whatever. It's like, oh, I just talked to Ed. I know he's not busy, or I just talked to Ron. I know he's working on a new set. Like, let's have him come in. If you're at the top of the head, back in the day, you could go into Marvel and you could actually walk. I mean, you had to kind of sneak in and you had to have, you had to ninja your way through. But if you got into the offices, you could walk around and say hello to people and meet people. And then when it came time and then the next day when they're like, fuck, we need to meet a deadline. We need a penciler. Wasn't there some crazy kid in here just yesterday? Who dropped this thing off? Like, it's all about constantly making sure you're on the top of someone's mind.
Yeah.
And then that will pay dividends. But that's a whole different skill set than crafting a comic book or writing a joke. I think that's that kind of almost disregard for your own ego, because it's unpleasant, right?
Yeah, it is.
Well, the feedback situation you were saying, that's the one thing I think where comics, well, anybody successful in comics or writing, I'll say, and maybe even other types of art, but like comics, writing, and stand-up all have one major thing, which is they're informed by reaction to it.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can make adjustments. You can change up stuff. I guess a lot of arts are that way, obviously, but in this case, we're comparing comics and it's just both of them need an audience.
Yeah.
So the audience will tell you certain things.
Right.
George R.R. Martin has a letter in like the first Fantastic Four comic that have a letter column in it. George R.R. Martin was like right there as a little kid going, I really like this. And it's just like it informs. That's one thing I don't want to get down on people who critique stuff, especially if you try to do stuff.
Right.
Like, as I do more stuff, I find myself more willing to critique in private just as a learning tool. But I'm finding myself way less willing to critique in public because, honestly, man, like you were saying off air earlier a little bit, sometimes people will call an art job lazy or call an artist this or that. Right. And you don't know the baby he was bouncing on his knee during COVID while he was drawing that with his hand that hurts super bad from carpal tunnel, but he doesn't have no insurance. You don't know what was happening during that job. So you might need to shut the fuck up. You know what I mean? And it happens with screenwriting as well. Like people blaming the screenwriter for a bad movie is like blaming the hood ornament when a Cadillac hits you.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Well, I think that goes back to the earlier question of the difference between expertise and being an amateur, right? An expert knows the supply chain, right? He understands the process. An amateur has not lived it, has not been in the studio. Like, I got into a kerfluffle not too long ago because someone was criticizing the character designers on the What If first episode, right? They were going after Right. And I just went like, you know what you're talking about. Like you don't
Mhm.
work in the business, you don't work at that studio, and you didn't work on that show, so you don't know anything about that process.
Mhm.
And so you're welcome to have an opinion whether you liked it or not, but you're not welcome to have an opinion about why they were doing it or what their motivations were. It just doesn't work that way. Unless you were there, you don't know shit.
Oh, and just one last thing. Once we get off the subject of this guy, because I saw that kerfluffle and I contributed to it a little bit,
But
and
yeah,
I'll just say
right.
that guy was a tracing ass tracer too. And that just blows my
Yeah,
mind. Like I am not some person who hates digital art. Frankly, digital art got me back into stuff because I could do my blue line underline. I could do
right.
all of my stuff. I could use my layers the way that I used to clunkily on a light box. But just for me, I just felt like the ease of the layers and the different having so many different brushes
It's
to do
fantastic.
different effects and dry brush and stuff like that, and not have to sit there with my water and see if I didn't ruin it by laying down this. I don't know.
Right.
It was an iterative thing to do digital art, and it helped me to get better at real, actual human pen to paper drawing
Sure.
because I had so many man hours screwing up on the iPad. But
Absolutely.
there are some tracing ass tracers out there who are
Right.
just like every gun is like they draw guns like Michael Golden, but
Right.
they traced them all
Yeah.
and
And the
they
difference
don't
is Michael.
understand the
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, Mike and Golden drew that shit from memory, and that's why it's bent perspective, and that's why
Mhm.
it's in motion, right? That's a
Mhm.
deeper understanding of the thing. Listen, I use photo
Exactly.
reference all the time. It's something you have to do if you're drawing
Of course. Yeah.
anything, right? But but tracing something is can always be a mixed bag depending on how you're doing it and why you're doing it. And it certainly doesn't lend itself to personal expression. And I think one of the
Mhm.
reasons that we like certain artists or certain comedians is that they whatever they're putting on the page or whatever they're putting up on the stage, it's personal for them, but in such a way that it resonates personally for us. Like
Mhm.
one of the reasons I think I'm a huge fan, obviously, of Dan Panosian, and the stuff he's doing right now is pretty amazing, and he's doing a western, and he loves westerns, and so there's a lot of love in those pages that I think is directly attributed to his personality and his love of the medium and
Mhm.
love of the genre, and so that's an honest like he's making art because it feels right and he's doing it with his expertise and not only of his drawing but of the subject matter. It's one of the reasons that I think that I like and have been known for doing kung fu stuff, and so I think that the
Mhm.
stuff that you and that's the stuff that people resonate with is like the more honest and open you can be with yourself in your art. I think the more universal, the more personal you make it, the more universal I think it becomes. But that's
Yeah.
hard to do when you're tracing a photograph.
Boom. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why I brought that point up
Yeah.
because it precludes that Mike Mignola, P. Craig Russell,
Yeah.
Bo Hampton, like anybody you can name. My man Mark Teixeira, for Christ's sake, my man Mark Teixeira. Can you imagine how Mark Teixeira would draw, or how much worse his art would be if he was trying to give a shit that I mean, his guys are like 8 heads high and 6 of the heads are torso
Right.
and lit and upper body.
Yeah.
He That's how he draws.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I love him. His
Yeah.
Ghost Rider made me think that Ghost Rider was actually cool.
Yeah.
Like it's so amazing what some of these people can do with atmosphere and
Right.
personality and slinging that fucking ink. One
Yeah.
of my favorite guys, not to go off on a super nerd rant here, one of my favorite guys is Frank Turan, and he draws like video game stuff now. He did like 2 issues of the Punisher that are like legendary because
Oh,
they're
cool.
just 2 issues of the Punisher fighting a guy.
All
But
right.
anyway, he's like kind of a real ink slinger. And
Mm.
you know what I mean? Just like that kind of Mark
Right.
Teixeira, a
Jorge
lot of ink.
Sofrino kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Horace Savino, Jay Lee,
Yeah.
especially back in the days. Just there's a lot of ink on this page, and it's doing a lot of stuff.
Right.
And it's interesting. It's like you're carving the image out of the ink.
Yeah.
Jorge Safino and Gerardo Safino. I
Those
mean,
guys are
those are that's kind of my holy grail of guys right there to me.
absolutely. Yeah,
Well,
totally.
and let me say, as an amateur, and not even an amateur, because if anybody is on our Patreon and has seen what I try to draw. They know how bad this shit is. But what I'm talking about is from the outside, it's more interesting to me to see someone trying to express what's, not to be super cheesy, but what's within them
right
through their art than it is to see someone draw a perfect gun or draw a perfect tank. It just is. And don't get me wrong, if you're one of those people who within your heart is the perfect tank, that's still awesome too.
Yeah.
But when it's done in a way that's like, well, like, look, I'm terrible at drawing, but I could trace a decent tank.
Well, it just what
that's
one
not
real quick.
storytelling. That's not.
Well,
so what I hear you guys talking about is from the outside, is just talking about how boring it would be if everyone had the same style of realistic, overly realistic drawing. And I cannot agree more, because it would be so boring to not get from your Frank Quietly's to your Humberto Ramos to your all that stuff in between, that they're so different and fun and dynamic. And I don't know, I just love hearing you guys talk about that and confirming for a person who's more a consumer that my tastes are pretty great.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're willing to spend money on it, right, that's a big deal. And so the stuff and comics are great. They're a great, and not necessarily investment as an investment sake, but an investment in entertainment value, I think. Because it's pretty rare. I've worked in animation and comics, and animation is a lot of fun. And I think that the bigger studio production where, 100 people are working on it and you have a lot of money behind it, and that is really exciting to work on, because it's cool to be part of something that has that kind of level of excellence sort of baked into it, right? Like everyone who works in the show is a pro, and they have tons of experience, and that everyone is dedicated to a common goal. And so you can make something greater than yourself. But still, one of my favorite things is, do you remember Frank Miller's Ronin?
Yeah.
Right. I love that book, because that was just Frank experiment. It's like, here's all the shit I love. I love Mobius, and I love Lone Wolf and Cub, and now I've made a thing. And like, to me, I loved how purely Frank that was. And I always, I dream of ever doing anything that specifically Johnson, right? Like, the goal would be to, like, we all know who Frazetta and Mobius are, right? They're like, those are the guys who set the styles. And part of the way they did that is just by being purely them. No one's like them. And I just don't know I think that's the difference between what I am, which is a workman and a craftsman and a journeyman, as opposed to like a genius and a master. Like those guys, you can't, I don't know if you can learn any of that.
I mean, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
But let me say, don't underestimate your genius. I just want to say that right here.
Well, I mean,
I know that you're a humble person, and that's just the type of person you are. And yes, you are a great workman, and you do put out work, and it does look fantastic. But I'm just saying that you have your own style too. Right. And your style, for me, the stuff that I've read of yours that really, really kicks out is all the movement. You're amazing at making things look like they're moving. And
thanks, Ron.
Not everybody's great at that. That's a huge deal. So I think that also comes from the heart of you, because you're a martial artist as well. So those type of things, that comes from who you are, and we get to see that in your art as well. And that's a type of genius that you're not thinking about, because that's just who you are.
Oh, well, that's kind. But I do. I mean,
look, Ed. Like we had Kevin Hearn on. He's one of my favorite authors, and you're one of Ed's favorite artists. He's like, this is like his Kevin Hearn. He's not geeking out because he's a professional.
right.
But like this is a big deal for us, because we, and I know you're a very humble person. I'm just pointing it out that you're better than you think you are.
Oh,
because I think that's an important thing to do. Sorry, just had to do it. Okay.
Do try and make things move. That to me is always the most. That's always the most interesting thing to me, is that creating that illusion on a page. Yeah. One of the things, like, I love doing that in a comic. But one of the things I loved about doing when I moved over to storyboards, one of the things I loved about that is like I got to actually then draw the whole thing, right? It would take forever to do 4 or 5 seconds of a fight scene, but I got to do everything. You got to pose it all out, you draw all it out, and then when you see it move, it's super satisfying to be like, it worked.
It worked. That was so cool.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to have happen.
Well,
So
yeah,
I'm
I just want
curious.
to.
Go ahead, Ed.
I'm curious about that part though, about actual storyboarding versus comic books. You're one of the few people that can actually speak to the differences therein, because they're distinct differences, and they're not just number of drawings. They're
Right.
like the quality of each drawing is different for storyboarding versus comics, and getting your mind frame in the set of like, I'll do like, you remember those I know your storyboards are tighter than this, but you got to at least start in your mind on some level as like those John Buscema roughs, where it's just sort of
Those are pretty close.
moving,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are a pretty good parallel. I think it depends on what show you're doing, what the deadline's like, but and my boards tend to be a little bit tighter because I still come from comics, and I think tighter. It isn't necessarily better for a storyboard. Like, as long as you get the motion of things, it's okay to trust the overseas animators for the most part. Depending on who, it's so many questions though. Like, and this goes back to the expertise amateur, right? Because you need to know who. Here's a real difference between an amateur and an expert. An expert understands what their audience needs and can adjust to that, I think. And that's an emotional relativity, I think, that you can do either while you're at the board or when you're on stage doing your set, doing an act. I think being able to really feel what's landing and what's not landing, and then adjust within the framework of what you're trying to accomplish to pull the audience along. I think that's, and then when you're doing storyboards, part of your audience is your producers and your directors and the executives. And so you have to really be able to navigate between, this is cool, I know this is cool, the fans are going to love this, this does tribute to the story, and then also the executive who may or may not understand or have time to really get into the process. How do I bring them along? How do I give them what they want to see? And so I think that can be the difference. Really is like working in-house. You have to navigate a whole lot of different kinds of artistic politics, not just the politics of being in an office, which is its own thing, but just the politics of making the art acceptable for everyone.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I have a question as well.
Sure.
So because you obviously became an artist pretty early on. What kind of comics inspired you? Like, was there any artists or specific, comics that like you remember going, okay, this is why I want to do this?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's I became a Conan fan pretty early on. Like I found, John Buscema was the guy for me. Not only did I discover his How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way book pretty early on, I found Conan Savage Sword, the magazine, the black and white. So that was, for a long time, I thought that a penciler, like the John Buscema loose pencils, like that was what a penciler did, and that you hooked up with a Tom Palmer or an inker, and then that was your job. And I still resist tight pencils, right? It still bothers me. I'm like, this is not my job. I'm not supposed to worry about these other things. This is someone else's gig, but it doesn't work that way. So sadly, John Buscema obviously is a huge factor. Gil Kane, I discovered when I was a kid. I found Starhawk's little book. I don't know if you guys ever seen the Starhawk's newspaper strip.
That's pretty legendary stuff. I've never seen it in real life, but like on the internet, I have seen it.
I have one in my closet. I can get it if you guys want to see it. But it's an old little paperback that had the Gil Kane, and it was like little marker drawings. Well, they're not little. I mean, they're brilliant. But so I saw that early on, and then John Byrne, George Perez. I was a big fan of the X-Men and the Teen Titans and all that stuff. But really just the classic American comic book guys. And it wasn't, I forget when I realized I could make a living doing it. I think when I was in high school, my buddy Steve and I did a newspaper strip for a local newspaper that was our version of Starhawks. It was kind of a sci-fi
Wow.
weekly adventure thing. And we made $15 per strip.
Nice.
Yeah. Which is in the end like 20 cents an hour. But it was that was, I'm like, oh, so you could do this as a job. Like this can be, if you hustle and you make the connections, then you can find work and make this a real living. And that's so right out of high school, I was like, I want to do this. I want to be a comic book artist.
Well, I mean, this is one part of that process, though, that I just want to hear you like say and like your own way of explaining it, because there are a billion talented amateurs out there. I mean, if I'm one, frankly, I'm better than your average bear at drawing, but somewhere along the line, placing figures in space, working out how to draw a train from your memory pre-internet, all these different things
Right.
that just were so daunting to me that I was like, I don't think I'm that. I honestly don't think I'm that. And it obviously, you name your own limitations, because there was one point in my life where I was like, there's no way I'm a stand-up comedian.
Right.
I am an asshole. I say what I really mean and people laugh at it to like get away from how real I'm being. That's not what a comedian is. I had never seen some of these guys, Patrice O'Neill or Bill Burr or any of these guys who that's their act as well. They're just like, no, I really mean this. I'm putting a top spin on it, but I mean this. So you're giggling uncomfortable. This guy's laughing because he totally gets it. That's a guy's a freak. All this sort of types of comedy, I didn't know. I thought comedians were clowns who were expected to be liked all the time, and that damn sure ain't me.
Right.
So you name your limitations is all I'm saying. And I conquered that particular one, got on TV as a comic. Who'd have thunk it, after years of saying I'm not that. But with comic books, there was always still, for me, a talented amateur. There's always been that trying to place figures in space, trying to actually do something between the gutters, trying to draw an image on this side and then an image on this side that suggests this greater life between the gutters. Right. How do you do this and have each of these panels be great in their own way, but work with that smaller canvas of them being kind of little, so I can look at the whole page and see it as a whole. Right. All of that, I'm sorry, I'm old now, and I feel like I'm washed up, and I'm just gonna do my own Harvey P. Carr, draw it like I can kind of thing. I'm never gonna hire anybody, but I'll hire myself to draw it as good as I can and put it out and try to be like early Neil Adams hated him, Frank Miller level drawing. Oh, right. And just get my stories out there. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like, what did you do to defeat that? Or do you remember when you defeated that mentality of this is just too fucking hard? How did you defeat that?
Well, I mean, I don't think I've never defeated it 100%. I think that it's one of those things that you have to fight that war in stages, right? Like, so just going back, like, so it's like any other thing. It's just hours. It's just hours being thrown at it. Whenever I'm at a show and someone goes like, I just wish I had your talent. I always get kind of upset by that, because it's kind of insulting. It's like, I don't have any talent. I have hours and hours sitting by myself trying to figure out this thing, studying. It's not unlike going to college, where you then have a PhD or a master's or a B or whatever it is. I never went to college, but then you have whatever those letters are after your name that connotes that you have studied this thing for 10,000 hours or 20,000 hours or whatever. I think drawing comics is the same way. The tough and really great thing about comics is that, especially when I was learning how to do it, there wasn't a curriculum, right? So you had to take a guy that you liked or take a couple of guys that you like and really like Jose Luis Garcia Lopez is one of my all-time favorite artists. And I still study him, try and deconstruct what he's doing and why today, to try and understand the craft of what he's putting together. Because there is an underlying math to it, right? Like if I want to create the sense of impendent, like it's all about what I'm trying to communicate. I think that's really the thing, is like figuring out what it is you're trying to communicate, and then trying to figure out how that would be represented as a visual, and then just doing hopefully your fundamentals are in a place enough that you can then sort of craft the visual that you have in your mind, and then style becomes how you make that drawing real. So breaking it down into beats of let's say in my fight scene book, I talk about the 5 stages of a fight scene. And one is, the first stage is setting up the initial relationship, the initial conflict. Like there's A and B, and A wants to kick B's ass, right? So we see them both. And then A attacks B, B then responds, and then so that's 2 and 3, and then 4 is the final hit, right? Whatever the final knockout blow is, and then 5 is the reestablishing of whatever that relationship, the new relationship. Is B knocked out? Is A knocked out? Whatever that thing is. So for me, I've always been, it's because you're right, Ed, it's a huge fucking question. How do you do this thing? How do you communicate this idea? It's almost incapacitating sometimes, of like, I don't know so Superman flies to the city and he fights a giant spider. Okay, well, what does that look like? How would I show that? What's important about that? How do I make someone feel that that's interesting or scary or whatever? So I always find, and this is some of the, so I'll give you one of the tricks, Ed. Whenever I start drawing, the first thing I do is draw a box on a blank piece of paper. That way I know that whatever I'm drawing next exists in that box. So I've taken infinity and then cut it down, right? So it's, for me, and this is just because it could be too big a question, right? So I take it down into small chunks, and then I immediately cut infinity in half by putting a box in it, and then I'll just make smaller boxes. I think this moment and that moment kind of go together. So I'll just start really carving out pieces of the infinity that I think go together. And then you can draw, right? You draw figures well, you understand shapes and that kind of stuff, and fundamental perspective. So then once you have pictured it in your mind enough, this is what I think is going to happen. Then it's just all about the fundamentals. Then it's just about like, because then each fundamental has, this is the nerdiest ever, right? Each thing has, in my mind, a mathematical quotient, right? So if I say it's characters A and B, and they are evenly matched, I will put the eye line I will even out their eye line. So I'll have them on the same plane. Those guys are evenly matched. If I think that they're not evenly matched, then I will put the camera closer to the person who I think has more power in the scene. And so now the math is helping me picture what needs to be drawn. And if I think that it's more like, am I a God's eye view, kind of like, am I an uninvolved observer? Then I'll raise the camera up. Am I on the side of one character or the other? Then I'll put the point of view closer to that person in a lower angle. So for me, most of the drawing goes hand in hand with trying to figure out like the science of like, this is the math of this particular scene, which is one of the reasons it takes me so long to draw anything. Because I have to go I have to go through that ridiculous scenario all the time. And the goal as a professional and as an artist who's just trying to like make art and tell the best you can is like, eventually that becomes automatic. Like you eventually though that you don't have to eventually you don't have to show your work.
Yeah.
Right. That's the goal is, eventually you just draw it and you're Joe Kubert and you're a badass. But I still have to go through all the stages and all the work. And then the math has to make sense for me even before the drawing makes sense.
Well, but is it, and I don't mean to demean this person when I say it, this is not controversial, but I don't know that like Simon Bisley does that. He's a genius, like a lot of people are geniuses
Right.
that we were talking about the genius. And I just
Right.
don't think he thinks about that. And I'm not saying that that puts him above you on any level. 'Cause I think,
Oh, no, it
frankly,
puts him way
some of
above.
the stuff. No, but
Yeah.
I think some of the stuff that I love about him would be even better if he thought about it like Jeff Johnson for a second. Like, I'm just saying there's so many pieces of people that could be applied to different things. Like, I've seen people who I wish they had some Joe Quesada in them. I've
Right.
seen people I wish they had some Dan Panosian. I've
Yeah.
seen my damn self. I wish I had some Jeff Johnson or some Dave Johnson in regards to line economy.
Right.
And like what this actually means. And then sometimes I want to get a little bit, I don't want to say like frenetic and powerful like Dan. Like
Yeah.
Dan would lay down some strokes. It's just like bam, bam, bam. And it's not that he doesn't think about it, but the
Right.
thinking is in some mechanism that he's got down now.
Yeah.
I've seen it progress over the years. And right
I'm-
now, there's a thought to action Wolverine situation. I know he'd love that.
Yeah.
that
No,
comparison.
when Dan draws and when Dan's inking, it's like a samurai cut. Like that's the cut.
Mhm.
That's it. You're dead. That's the cut. Do you guys ever read the Musashi books?
I've tried to be smart enough to read the Musashi books.
So there's a great scene. I think it's Iji Yoshikawa. Is that the name? I can't remember. You guys have to double check that.
We'll fact check. We'll throw it
Right.
up on the screen.
I think it's Iji Yoshikawa, but he wrote him a long time ago. And there's a great scene where Musashi he's going to challenge this other samurai, this older samurai, and then he's waiting for the older samurai to come into the room, and then that guy sends in I think his maid, maybe it's his daughter, but anyway, it's someone who's carrying a flower arrangement, and so she's bringing in the flower arrangement. I believe it's with tea, and then out of nowhere, Musashi draws and cuts the top of the flower off while she's coming in. So he just out of nowhere cuts off the top of the flower, and then he looks at the cut that he made in the flower, and he can see that the bottom of the flower has also been cut by a sword. And just by looking at it, he realizes that he would have gotten his ass kicked by whoever cut that original cut.
Wow.
And so,
wow.
Right. And so, and what he realizes in that moment is that the master samurai that he was there to challenge realized that Musashi wasn't going to be a challenge and that he was good, but he wasn't at his level. And so it sent him this warning, basically, of the flowers. And that was the test. If Musashi had not noticed, then he would not have been good enough. Then this guy would have just killed him. It's like, well, you're not. You're too dumb to live. But he did notice, and then Musashi left. He's like, oh. And so then that guy had a lot of respect for him because he knew exactly, he's like, now you are close enough, you're good enough to notice how much better I am than you. And I think that's always been one of my favorites. That's always been one of my favorite scenes in all literatures. I think like that is so samurai on so many different levels. And I bring that up is because Dan is now that guy, like he's the guy who's making those cuts now. Like he's just like, this cut is perfect, first time. And so anyone else trying to be like, oh, what is he? You're too late. It's just you're not. And I'm definitely, when it comes to inking, I'm always like, fuck, my cuts are so weak compared to this guy's. But it's a joy to watch.
So interesting. I think, look, from listening to you guys, what I'm hearing is, and this is something Ed likes to tell people a lot, go do stuff. Just do it. Just do it. If you don't think you're good at backgrounds, great. Start doing backgrounds all day long and do it. And then do it some more and then keep doing it. And then eventually you start, study, learn, try to get better, look at other artists, try to come up with your own style through that. But then after that, just keep doing it. Because the more you do anything, the better you're going to get at it. I mean, like, think about driving. When you first started driving, you had to be constantly like looking in your mirror, thinking, I got to check this, I got to check this, got to check this, make sure my seatbelt's on. Like all the steps that you learned how to do are now automatic steps. You put your seatbelt on, you look in the thing, you look in your rear, you pack up, you put your, you do all the stuff you're supposed to do, but you don't think about that stuff anymore. because it's become
Right.
automatic. And I think that's what you've got to do with any type of art that you love doing. Just do it.
It does have to become,
damn you,
almost
Nike. Sorry.
right. It has to become reflexive in some way, right? Like part of it has to become reflexive. And I think that's one of the things that, Ed, to go back to what you're talking about, like, you draw well, right? And if you have any hesitation about, being a comic book artist, that's the part that's not, it seems to me that that's the part that's not drawing that freaks you out, right? Because the drawing part, those are skill sets that are easy to learn. It's then applying that to the bigger, the more amorphous task of telling a story. Like that's, but you're also
what
the
I
storyteller.
envision? But you know what I envision? I envision like, those people who write beautiful like prose and beautiful dialogue balloons, and then the characters are always in this Kevin Smith 2-shot that sucks. I envision myself doing that, and not to diss Kevin Smith's directing, but it isn't the greatest part of his game, and he'll say that himself. But the point is, I envision myself either doing that or trying to do some worm's eye thing that sucks, and like it's just this basic bitch fear of failure in public that I got to get over, because I've my regular drawings fail in public. Why shouldn't my sequential ones? It's just flipping a little bit of a switch and getting a little bit more discipline. But as we wind down here, and I am doing it though, I've committed to, on our Patreon, debuting some of the ways that I'm getting into it to kind of like put people in the mindset of like, hey, this is a dumb old man training for the heavyweight belt. Watch it as it unfolds. And I think that'll be a beautiful thing for people to see if I'm able to like do it. You know what I mean? It's that, or announce I'm losing weight. So check this out. I have Draw Fight Scenes Like a Pro here. The people on YouTube can see this. People on the podcast world, can you please tell people how to get it? And as we wind down, I want to talk about your book as part of your teachings and some of the stuff you're working on today. So can you tell people how to get Draw Fight Scenes Like a Pro?
Honestly, dude, I don't know if you can get it anymore. Like,
really?
Well, I mean, so I have a couple of funny stories about it. One, it did not sell well.
Really quickly, I did want to think about like the self-publishing, right? Not self-publishing, but like small press publishing aspect. So let's go right into that. How did you come up with the idea to do a book, and what was the process for doing one? Because I love that stuff. Watson
and Guptill came to, I can't forget, it was one of the guys that, I think it might have been Bart Sears at CrossGen at the time. And they asked him.
Boots and Babes shaped a generation. I read Justice League Europe for frickin' Bart Sears.
He's great. Bart Sears is phenomenal, right? He's good at everything. And Watson and Guptill asked him if he wanted to do, I believe, I could be getting the timing off. This is a while ago. They asked Bart or someone else at CrossGen to do a series of draw like a pro, draw blank like a pro. And I think one guy did one on monsters, or was going to do one on monsters. I don't know if it ever came out or not, but one guy was going to do one on storytelling, and they asked me if I wanted to do one on something, and I said I'll do one on fight scenes, since these guys have everything else covered, and fight scenes is the only thing I think I might know better than someone else, enough that I would be a reason to buy a book about it. And so that's how I got started doing it. And then I designed the book to be, well, Ed, you've read it. I designed it to be almost like a karate class. Like you do, if you start here learning this stance, this punch, this technique, whatever, you can build up to having the skill set to draw a whole comic. Fight scenes are the metaphor. But all the skills are just fundamental comic book skills. Unfortunately, it came out at a time that bookshelves were loaded with draw a dinosaur, draw a fairy princess, draw a manga, draw this. And so it got, if you flipped through it, there's a ton of drawings, but there's also just a ton of text where I'm discussing the theory of arrows and movement toward left to right and all that stuff. And I talk about a lot of concepts and a lot of the underlying reasons that you would draw something, and not just drawing a cool dinosaur. So it sat on the shelves. It did not move at all. And so
I love it.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I didn't buy it because I'm one of the cool kids on some level, and I got an autographed copy with
Right.
a Funky Fresh sketch, which we'll scan it and throw it in a
Oh, right
picture.
on.
But a Funky Fresh, a personal sketch from Jeff. So I can't say, oh, you assholes that failed my boy, because I
Right.
didn't buy it either. But I
No.
gotta say,
It's
I
totally
love
fine.
it, and it
Yeah.
pushed me. It pushed me to the level now that I wasn't mad at myself for failing myself as a comic book artist.
Mm.
That book made me mad at myself for failing myself as a comic book artist.
Well, that's
So
the wrong.
which is push no, but it's pushing towards the, well, you know how to get not mad at yourself, right?
Oh, yeah.
Do a comic book.
Yeah,
You know
do
what
the
I
comic
mean?
book.
So
Do start at the beginning and go all the way. Well, one of the things I think is funny, a friend of mine who, when we first met, he wanted to be a comic book artist also, and now he's a professional. He has been and is a comic book artist. But like when we first met, he also had How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, except that I had gone from beginning to end and studied every lesson in the book, like even the boring stuff, like drawing a chair or drawing perspective. Like I had actually done the book, and he had just gone to the cool shit, drawing Thor. So when it came down to doing
this guy.
right? so right, and he like. And so it turns out that many of my friends who are professional comic book artists who studied that book did the exact same thing. They passed all the boring shit and went right to drawing Thor. So I designed my book to be kind of the same way. Like there's cool stuff in it if you want to jump ahead to drawing cool characters, fight scene stuff. But if you do go all the way through it, there's the fundamentals are in there. And once you learn those, everything else kind of becomes easy. I'm currently working, and I'll send you a copy of it whenever I get it done. A second chapter, not a second chapter, but a second volume. So it's that book again, because that book is hard to get anymore. I don't think you might be able to still get it on Amazon. I'm not sure how many are available or where.
There's like a few copies.
Yeah. I have a few copies left. But I think that I'm doing a second volume that includes more martial arts, more multiple attackers, how to design a card chase fight scene, a gunfight, a sword fight, like how you would piece together, all with the same metaphors, that the fight scene is just the visual representation of any story, right? Like it's in the 5 stages I think are still applicable. But I'll add in some of the more like emotional context and like how to make someone feel about something a certain way, how to engender some sort of empathy to a character, right? So that'll be part of it. Also, like multiple fight scenes and bigger fight scenes and stuff like that. More of an anatomy section, and there'll be more of a boring fundamentals like drawing a lamp, drawing a car, that kind of thing. So it'll break it down more. So eventually I'll put the whole thing out as a Kickstarter, just one big gigantic book on how to draw comics the Jeff Johnson way.
That's awesome.
Nice. Well, I'll buy that one. You've been so
excellent.
You've been so nice. I gotta support you, and I'll make Ron buy one, and I'll just read his copy too.
No, I'll buy one, and I'll try to get better at drawing. How about that?
Yeah.
I like drawing. I'm just not good at it. That's fine.
Well, it's just the lack of hours. You know what I'm saying?
It just takes a long time. I remember I didn't learn, and not that I'm sporty at all anyway, but I didn't actually learn how to throw a spiral till I was in my 20s with the football. Like I'd never actually done it. I never had a football in my hand until I was at some party, and they're like, "Jeff, throw us the ball," and I embarrassed myself. They're like, "You don't have any idea."
Well, and you know what's funny? Why is it as we wind down talk about guy stuff? Why is it that it's way less embarrassing? Maybe it's a cultural thing, but it's way less embarrassing to have a crap jump shot than to have a shitty spiral. There's so many manly men with crap jump shots that I'm just like, you are the biggest sissy I've ever seen in my life, chucking it from the middle of your chest like it's a 3-year-old trying to shoot a 3. Like you're so terrible. But these guys,
that was actually pretty funny when we went to a July 4th barbecue at a friend's backyard, And it was funny to watch our comedian friends trying to shoot the basketball. It was
It's just not part of the skill set, but like
just,
throwing a spiral is a man skill. It's like carving a spear or something. Like you have to know it, or else you're a punk in America.
Maybe it's a hunting thing. I don't know. I don't know. But I wanted to tell you real funny. So the fight scene book, it didn't sell well, right? It sold okay, right? But it wasn't the breakout book that I wanted it to be. But it does have the honor of being banned in Texas prisons because they thought
that's the Jailhouse Rock book.
Oh my God, this is great.
They thought the martial arts in it were too teachable, right? They didn't want people learning the martial arts in the book because they didn't want them using it as any kind of a martial arts manual to fight the guards with. So so that book has that distinction. It's the only book I know of made by any of my friends that's been banned in Texas prisons.
That's hilarious.
Dude, okay, so besides that, as what you're working on, like I said, I'd like to have a nice big runway at the end of the podcast to like let you plug stuff that you're working on presently. Are there any shows that you're working on presently that you could say that you're working on and stuff, and also like private projects? Because I have a larger question as we round out, like the type of stuff that you'd like to draw as a creator-owned venture. So stuff that you've been working on, but also stuff you might take on in the future. Because like I said, I'm serious damn business. Ron was serious about you being one of my favorite artists. If I get one of these fool ass studios to give me money to develop something, I want to have you be my Steve Scroce for the Matrix. I want to have you do that because the sense of motion, it'll get my script over better for these losers that don't know how to read.
Right.
So we're helping each other. Quid pro quo, Clarice. And I would love for us to like share 50-50. Even if I wrote the script or whatever, you create all the character designs and stuff. So 50-50. I sincerely want to speak that into existence like LeVar Ball. I want to do that.
No, count me in 100%. So I'm working on a really cool project right now. It's with James Robinson. You know who that is, right?
Yes, Starman and a billion other things, but people know him from Starman.
So James is amazing.
JSA.
And we've been working on a project for a few years now. And the truth is that I get I put so much time into each page that they take a long time, and then I wind up having to take. I'm terrible. The thing that I'm worst at as a professional is time management. I get, as you can tell, I have a crazy long process and I get lost in the weeds a lot. So I've been working on this project with James for a few years now, and it's awesome. It's everything I've ever wanted to do in a comic book. It's a swords and sorcery fantasy thing. It's
yes.
That's you're speaking, Ron. Ron just you can't see his erection because he's a professional, but I can sense it.
I got a magic boner.
James is awesome. It's called Rogue's Kingdom. It takes place. So when we were developing it together, it wound up becoming sort of we found out the kind of thing we wanted to do and wound up being a fantasy swords and sorcery, kind of, adventure thing. Right. And so I stupidly thought like, you know what? Fantasy stuff's always set in the Middle Ages. It's always in cold ass England. It's always in castles. It's always like everything's moss covered and wet, and it's all, and that's great. But I want to do something a little bit different. So I decided to use the Three Musketeers, the French 1700s, and that visual as sort of my guiding light. So consequently, instead of castles, I'm drawing palaces. Instead of drawing guys on horses, I'm drawing carriages, and I'm loving it, and it's a lot of fun. But like, I really bit off way more than I can chew. It's a ton. And one of the things I didn't realize is that I don't know much about. I'm pretty good at the more Asian, Japanese, Chinese, Korean martial arts. And I have some passing knowledge of the European martial arts, but not really a good understanding of it. So for the last few years, I've really been trying to study fencing and knife fighting and a much different, a different kind of sword play, a different kind of combat. And so mixing that with having a centaur that has a lance and having a minotaur that has a bunch of axes, like trying to come up with cool fantasy fight scene stuff that we don't always see. Because normally, I mean, Ron, like it tends to be broadswords and arrows and axes, right? Which is awesome. But I wanted to do something a little bit different. So it's more rapiers and dirks and in a different kind of combat. The only thing we have different than the French 1700s is there's no gunpowder. So I didn't want to have any guns. But there's magic, right? And there's wizards and there's shenanigans. So
sounds great. I'm so excited.
That sounds like the poster. Magic, wizards, shenanigans.
Magic, wizards, and shenanigans. Yeah.
So what's the title again from the Lookout? And it's coming out on Image, right?
It's coming out of Image, right? Okay. I can't promise when because Ron is not Ron, but James is the most patient man on the planet because it's taking me forever to do stuff. Because I also get lost in the stuff that's not important, right? Like there's a scene where an old guy, our two heroes are in a prison caravan and they're being driven by oxen to get killed. And so I spent days designing the ox cart driver.
Well, he's got to be believable. He can't be, a blacksmith sitting up there as an ox cart driver. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
He's got to have calluses on his hands because he's constantly holding the reins.
Right. And you got to make sure he's holding them right way. Yeah.
Because he's sitting constantly. I mean, these are important things.
Right. So you can see why I can see every hour is on a page. It's on the page, but that's coming out at some point and it's going to be awesome.
And what's it called?
Rogue's Kingdom.
Rogue's Kingdom. So be on the lookout for that, as well as the second volume of Draw Fight Scenes Like a Pro, but it's going to be called How to Draw Comics the Jeff Johnson Way.
Maybe. I mean, it might still be called like just How to Draw Fight Scenes. I mean, it would be pretty arrogant to be like How to Draw Comics the Jeff Johnson Way, because that's really not.
Well, at least you don't have a speed nib company. I mean,
Listen, I have stock. I have stock in that company.
So basically, as we round out here, I have one final question, and it's a little, I don't know, it's a little esoteric, I guess, but it's like let's say you complete that, and you have carte blanche to draw anything else. You complete Rogue's Kingdom. It's a big hit and it's its own thing. Cottage industry. What do you think you would do I'd probably do another volume of that if James has another story and everything.
Oh yeah, no, we have tons. We have tons and tons of stories.
So in between that, there's this just dirty, nasty story in you about kung fu warfare or something, and just something simple like your simple kung fu book set more or less in the present day or whatever. Are there any things like that you think like you could do almost like your Sin City or something? I would love to see you working chiaroscuro, cheap and dirty outlaw comics, 15-page fight scenes like Shaolin Cowboy. I'm just pitching that to you as something I would love to see you do or see something or contribute to you doing something like that. Just a nasty, like Chuck Dixon and Jorge Zafino type comic, right? You know what I'm saying? That you know what I mean? Something like that.
I have, it's when you're sitting here drawing and your part of your brain is concentrating on, does this engine look like an engine, right? Then the other part of your brain drifts, and I have a million different stories, right? I have a million things to work on. One of the ones is most definitely it's got some kung fu in it. I love drawing all that stuff. It involves dragons and tattoos and a very Mortal Kombat-y kind of tournament thing, right? That's just one crazy idea. But I've always, I don't know, it never happened, but right. No, I've always wanted to do. So I have the bones of a typical boring, each person has a dragon tattoo. Each dragon has an element, and then those dragons have to fight. Ron knows. We've all read that story a million times.
Yes.
But then
I love those stories.
Yeah, no, me too. I would love to do and it's the. I mean, that's a classic version of how do you get superpowers and kung fu together.
Exactly.
I called it when I first wrote it. I called it The Art of War but I don't know if you could do that anymore, right?
Yeah. A Wesley Snipes movie from 1998 to have a talk with you, a stern talking to.
But I think one of the things that I really when I was working at Valiant for a little while, and then it never happened because Valiant went under. But with Keith Giffen, I was going to do a new Magnus robot fighter, and so
oh
God. I almost didn't want to tell you because I knew it would hurt you. But yeah, we did a bunch of designs. We had a story going, and it was going to be a reimagining of Magnus Robot Fighter. And so,
just all the screws, but that would have taken you'd be drawing that right now, all the damn screws popping out of their heads from knife hands, and doing nerve cluster strikes on fucking robots, robot.
100%. It would have been glorious, but like, so I didn't get to do that. And so that is an itch I've never been quite able to scratch, like just a full-blown kung fu robot battle set in the future. Yeah.
One script with robot kung fu coming up.
Right.
Put that in the hopper, baby, because that's you're speaking my language as we dismount here. I think you would like Sea of Rust, and I think you would like 0 Hour. They're both written by C. Robert Cargill. He wrote Doctor Strange with Scott Derrickson. He wrote some other jazz, but he wrote 2 novels about what happens after the robots win.
Okay.
And it's not humans versus robots. Don't get it twisted. After the robots win, there's a whole mess of it's basically Sea of Rust is basically 7 Samurai with robots.
Love it.
And maybe more like the Magnificent Seven with robots. And the other one is like if Calvin and Hobbes were in the apocalypse, and Hobbes was a robot that could go from being a plush toy to whooping your ass to protect its kid.
I love
that story. I think you would really enjoy both of those books, given your aesthetics and given our shared aesthetic, the things that we like. But it's been a super fucking pleasure having you on.
Oh, dude, it's been great to catch up. I miss you guys. I mean, I love where I live. I love the trees and being next to streams and water and really great local beers. But I do miss the thing that I miss about Los Angeles is just how many creative people there are doing creative things and how the different communities interact. Like the fact that we all got to hang out at something as ridiculous as Drink and Draw, right? Like that to me is something that's, I mean, perhaps it happens. I know it happens in New York also, but I think it seems kind of a uniquely LA thing because everyone's kind of on top of each other and there's so much overlap in the various industries that I think that LA might have been the best place for that to happen.
Well, I just want to say, wonderful. Like you being part of the founding of Drink and Draw, I got to say it, like, I never got to go as much as my buddy Tom Frank. He was like a religious person. I think he's the one who introduced me to all you guys. And I thank him forever for that, because like having actual friends and people follow you on Twitter that are actually in the industry and achieving your dreams on some level, even though I'm a professional in another thing, I could still appreciate how professional you guys are in this thing that was my childhood dream. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's just amazing what you guys do and like knowing you and stuff. But like that community you fostered for a guy who works in animation, sitting next to a guy who draws comic books beautifully, sitting next to a guy who does his own personal Harvey Picard graphic novels, but he draws the hell out of some doll heads and so on and so forth, all sitting together at the same table. All like equals. Like Dave Johnson said something to me, like, you're such a nice guy, you can't intimidate me, even though you could kick my ass all over the place. But Dave Johnson saying something to me freaked me the fuck out. I was like, don't talk to me, you're Dave Johnson, you know. It was so weird. And then Dan, you know, seeing him pull up in his car and pop out like, yeah, I'm Dan Panosian, what's up? And he's got this Silver Fox thing going. It's just like all the old comic books and Wizard magazines you've read come to fucking life, and now they're your friends. And it just, people don't understand how special Drink and Draw was. And I just want to give you guys a fat ass plug right now. The spirit of it is still alive. Drink and Draw is on every Thursday. You guys can manage it between.
It's still happening at Casey's, right? Like
Well, I mean, given all these this poisonous air and shit, I don't
Right,
know
right,
what
right.
the hell
Yeah.
is going on out there.
Right, right.
But I just know the spirit for these times, the spirit of it is alive on the internet on the Drink and Draw YouTube channel, which I want to give a fat plug here. You, Dan Panosian, Joe Quesada, who just that's a great get. You guys having met him back in the days was a really good move on your part. I mean, he runs Marvel and he's your buddy that you get to hang out with. That blows my mind constantly when I watch you guys on Drink and Draw.
Yeah, Joe's awesome. It's still surprising to me that he comes on like he likes the drink and draw thing. He likes hanging out and drawing because, as you know, one of the things
great equalizer. It's the great equalizer. Last things last. It's a great equalizer. That's why I loved it so much. And you guys keep the spirit on YouTube. Go ahead.
Drawing is it's something that everyone kind of can do, and it is a form of expression and relationship. Like it is really kind of an interesting, intimate sharing if you're all kind of hanging out and drawing, and it's just a lot of fun, right? It's a different kind of conversation, and it's really freeing, and it's just a great way to meet people. Like I've made so many good friends from just hanging out, drink and draw. People who were in industries I never would have met, like people who do fashion design or video game design, or people who just walked by and always liked drawing and just decided to hang out. Like that's the best. I love that.
Yeah, and it's responsible for our relationship. So I will thank it forever. And the YouTube channel, go to Drink and Draw on YouTube every Thursday around like 6. You guys hop on
Thursday
for about an hour.
Thursday at 6.
Yeah, and they have themed episodes. Some of the Titans of Comics drop in. They've Bill Sienkiewicz episodes, Howard Chaykin episodes.
The Walt Simon episode was pretty amazing.
Walt Simon's, oh my god,
yeah, that was a great episode. Yeah,
I mean his library, Walt Simon's library is like when those Hogwarts fools with them.
Yeah,
all those books of magic.
Yeah,
he's got the books of magic. He's got like Tank illustration from 1914. Volume 8.
He's got he's an incredible person. He's awesome.
He's like one of these last super living legend types, like him, Klaus Janson.
Yeah,
like these guys are living legends of comics. And you guys, what do you had Klaus on once before, right? On Drink and Draw?
No, I haven't talked to Klaus. I mean, I don't know if Dan's talked to him.
You guys gotta get him. He's such a beautiful curmudgeon. I love him.
Oh yeah, no, Klaus is definitely on the list of people I would love to talk to. I mean, one of the things that's really great about Klaus is not only is he a fantastic anchor, right? But he's an amazing penciler and storyteller. And I've never actually talked to him, but I've never heard anyone say anything bad about him. Like he's just supposed to be this amazing person. Yeah.
No, he doesn't suffer fools, but he's not mean about it.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Those people are rare, and you're much the same. You suffered my foolishness long enough. Thank you so much for coming on. And
it was my pleasure.
And Ron, get us out of here before I Chris Farley all over this guy some more.
All right.
Okay, guys. You know the deal. Check out our Patreon. You go to patreon.com/thegreatestpod. You can sign up for the $5 tier that gets you extra pods. You can sign up for that $7 tier, which will get you to see Ed's amazing art. And I will also send you a picture of a whale that sort of looks like Canada. So, and then also, that's the $7 tier. So do that. And then also, more importantly, thank you as always for listening to another episode of The Greatest Pod. Yay!